don't force what you think your workforce will enjoy on them.
Welcome to the People-Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello and welcome. I've said this before, communication, when it comes to creating that unicorn culture, communication is key. And the number one complaint that we get when conducting any employee engagement, employee satisfaction survey exercise is lack of communication. People want to be in the know. We spend so much time on that external communication and on selling our brand externally. Unfortunately, we fail to recognize that our most important client is our internal client, is our employees. So today we welcome Hersh Rephun. While we don't know who invented the hyphenate, writer, comedian, publicist, and brand strategist, Hersh has put it to good use. He's led teams in PR, creative, brand, strategy, global partner, and franchisee relations. His clients include changemakers, market leaders, agencies, institutions, production companies, and Oscar-winning filmmakers. Empathy and accessibility are the hallmarks of his work. He hosts the top 2% podcasts, Truth Tastes Funny and Yes Brand, and operates on one simple principle: sell the truth. Welcome, Hersh.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it.
We're so excited to have you today and for you to share some insights in terms of how employers, how companies can improve on their communication, their internal communication strategies. What kinds of quick fixes can they implement the minute they're done listening to this episode to improve the level and clarity of their messaging with their most important clients, as I mentioned, their employees, their team members. So let's start off with you telling us a bit more about your journey and how you ended up doing what you now do.
Well, I think we'll definitely come back to some of the things you said in your introduction about the employee being the most important client, almost the most important, because we're definitely have to get back to that, because that therein is the kind of secret to everything. But to show where it all comes from, I started out as a stand-up comedian in New York City when I was in my early 20s. And it was only by chance that I ended up in advertising. I was taking film school classes at School of Visual Arts in New York, very, very great school for filmmaking, for design, for art, for all that stuff, and for advertising. And they convinced me to take some advertising courses. And it took years and years for me to develop a style of communication that transcended the simple definitions. You know, you could be an ad writer, a copywriter. You could be a publicist, a press writer. You could be a business writer, a corporate writer, a communications writer, or a hostage negotiator. You could be all. You could be all
these very specific titles.
Yeah. You could have a lot of specific communication skills, but stick to your knitting and be in like one niche. And I, over the course of my career, have worn all those different hats, and I thought it was random. But what I realized was, no, it's because I have a good ear for how people express themselves and what they need. I'm a pretty good listener too. And I think that's where I want to talk about this disconnect that happens, is because, you know, when the resource department is trying to sell the company to the prospective employee or team member.
Yep.
They give a whole, bill of sale of all the stuff, and they kind of present it the way their public facing image is presented. And then the person joins the company, and now it's like, that's not what I signed up for. And you almost have to wonder, do they have the same problem on the product side? Like, do they beef up this product and then sell it, and it's not truth in advertising?
I use the example of catfishing. You've heard that, right? In dating world. And I tell my clients all the time, you need to deliver on that pitch that you're providing to these prospective candidates, and you're, like you say, you're taking out all the bells and whistles and telling them how you're an amazing place to work, but then they show up and the reality of their experience doesn't reflect what was pitched to them in that interview. And I think the dating world, they call it catfishing, right? Like you're projecting this image, but then in reality, you're a whole other person. Well, they need to make sure, and I think therein lines that disconnect you referenced earlier, right? That they need to reconnect that disconnect and make sure they're delivering on the pitch.
Yeah. And this concept of selling the truth comes from the notion that a lot of us feel like, to your point that you were just talking about, we have to tell people what they want to hear. And it's not so much that. How do I tell each person what they want to hear? It's about getting in touch with yourself and saying, okay, every brand is a person or people. Every brand is it doesn't matter if it's beans or bicycles or financial planning. It's a person, people world. We're not servicing yet a society of robots. No. Although I have a feeling that the way things are
AI is going.
The most likely scenario is that it'll be like Blade Runner. We won't be able to tell the difference between the Borgs and the people, and the Borgs will probably become just as obnoxious as we are, and then it won't be any different. You'll just have people saying, yeah, I'm human. My wife's a Borg, and we've decided not to have any children.
This is normal. Yes, this is normal.
We've decided not to have children because the wiring is just so expensive. And you thought orthodonture was expensive. Imagine it when you have to wire your entire child.
We digress.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it is a digression. But you know what? Some brands need more of this playfulness to get to the heart of communication. I do feel like, they keep a certain distance with staff, and they want to maintain a level of professionalism, but they also have to consider the tone. Why can't they address the staff the way that the brand addresses their audience, their external audience? So if it's a big fashion brand or something and they sell a certain lifestyle, now sometimes they try, but they get too bogged down in the stricture. Oh, well, here's our brand guide. Here's our brand guide. Everything you say now, you can't refer to it as, Luscious Lollipops. You have to refer to it as Luscious Lollipop LLC. And, whatever it is, that's fine. I get that. I do a lot of that on the copy side, and I certainly did earlier in my career. But I think that the heart and soul has to be there. That's just something that we can't separate from our corporate identity.
I love that. And I love what you're saying about just why not have fun at it, and why not bring that heart and soul into that internal messaging? Why does it have to be, why does professional have to translate to strict, to the point, no images and very, very, very fancy language? Why can't it just be spoken in a way and communicated in a way that's impactful, but also that is the listeners, so the team members, are able to really digest and assimilate this information and then act accordingly? Why do they have to make it so strict? That's the only way to describe it. It's so strict that it's stuffy and dry.
It is, and what it does is it impedes progress. I'll give you an example of something that was made evident to me. I didn't even plan it this way. So I'm one of the kind of niches that I'm in now is doing these email campaigns. If a 7-figure company wants to be an 8-figure company, their brand voice has to mature, but it also has to connect with their audience. They have a really strong, let's say they got a really strong audience out there of subscribers, email list, but they don't want to bore them to death with a bunch of, nonsense. They want to be opened and pay. Okay. So I create this campaign. It's doing really well. It's, got like 50% open rate, which is crazy, which is really good. And I say this because what just occurred to me is if a company would say, we're going to do that with our internal communications, right? We're going to actually have the same writer or the same style, the same voice, which is different from saying we sell widgets and we have to be widget salespeople. It's a style. It fits the brand. If it's a really corporate brand, it will fit. It will make it fit. But the fact is, if you take that and send it to your employees who have to read the email, right? They don't have a choice. So they're kind of like a captive audience. They're not the same as your consumers, right? Because they have to
reading it no matter.
They have to read it.
They have to read it. They're mandated.
They have to read it. They want right. But they have to read it. But they appreciate, oh man, that was really creative. That told a story. They're giving us some laughs. It's not forced because email correspondence is an ongoing event. It's not a memo, the memo.
No, it's open and consistent. Yeah.
It's open and consistent. But if you think about it, just as interpersonal relations are, when time comes that the company has to say something serious, like let's use the pandemic as an example. Mm-hmm. And they say, and they have this rapport that they've been developing with friendly emails, with funny stories, and in line with the brand. So it's the right fit. And then something serious happens and they go, listen, we're going to have to ask everybody to take X% cuts, from these departments, from all departments. We're stymied by this, but we want to support you, blah, blah, blah. Now that workforce is like, well, they've treated us with respect. They've been caring and warm in their communications. And now they're asking for something. Okay, I'm not going to, I can't be too angry about it. And again, it's all how you say it,
I agree. There's like 3 things I want to pick up on throughout. So we're going to backtrack a bit. I love what I heard when you said we spend so much time and even your approach is really understanding the audience and crafting the messaging to make sure that it's going to resonate with that audience and that they are going to read when you were talking about those email campaigns and whatnot. And that the importance of kind of adopting that same approach with your employees, which what I love is it's people powered, it's a people-powered approach. It's starting with your people and starting with where they're at and crafting your message from their perspective of what's going to resonate, what's going to land. So I love, love, love that you've kind of highlighted that parallel approach. And I think it's really important that companies adopt that mindset that their clients, their employees are just as important as those customers outside of the company. And that in their messaging, if they do it consistently, and there's always this open communication channel, it's flowing and flowing and flowing, and that it's you've got some funny stuff in there, you're showcasing successes, you're highlighting maybe improvement areas, and this is happening regularly. If and when there's a more serious topic to communicate, I 100% agree that it's going to resonate that much more, and that you're going to get that buy-in much quicker than you might have if they've not heard anything for 3 months. And then we get the email, right? But I can already see it, the email where suddenly, of course, they want us to cut. They don't talk to us for months. And suddenly the only email they give us is to tell us that we need to cut everything in our budgets and blah, 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 right? So that's a perfect example of the impact of not communicating, because that's one of the things I've often seen with clients where they think that if we don't say anything, it's because things are going well. We've heard that, right? If you don't hear anything, that's not a problem. That's not the case. No. There's so many cases where you're leaving all these employees, all these team members in the dark. And so they're going to be forced to come up with their own assumptions.
Yeah.
And those assumptions can be toxic to any organization, to a workplace culture in general.
The fear of communication is what I think holds, like people think, and they get confused because there is truth in that. If you don't say something, you don't risk offending anybody, right? If you don't say something, you can't say the wrong thing. But the truth is, silence is also a weapon. And people know, it, like I know from having clients. I have a sixth sense And I used to tell my business partner at the agency that we have together, I used to say, "Oh, you better call so and so because we're about to get that call. We're about to get that call." And he's like, "Yeah, okay, I'll call him tomorrow. I'll call him later. I'll call him in the middle of something." And then boom, the phone rings. "Oh, so and so's on the phone." And I'm like, now we're not proactive anymore. Now we're reactive.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
use your spidey sense. And if you feel your community needs something, ask and go out there, and don't be afraid to liaise with them and kind of, figure out what's up. There's nothing beats getting in front of a situation.
Oh, yeah,
I'm not a
absolutely.
crisis PR guy, although I have done it for clients that didn't have the wherewithal to go out to a big crisis PR firm. They were just smaller, and they're like, "Well, Hersh, what should we do?" And in the situations that they were in, I would give them, that advice: get in front
Get in front of it. Absolutely.
get in front.
When in doubt, ask questions. I had
Yeah.
that. I was coaching a client this morning, and it's a manager, and he wanted, some support on how to find that assertive voice, how to communicate more assertively without coming off as aggressive. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting one, but a regularly occurring challenge that I get from leaders. And I said, okay, so what's the situation specifically? He's like, well, we've built this tool, managers aren't using it, they need to start using it. And I know they're probably not using it because of X, Y, Z. I'm like, okay,
Right.
So can I ask you why you know that? Well, because it's probably because of this, that, and the other thing. And I thought, what I'm hearing is a lot of assumptions at play. Have you thought to have a meeting with them to ask them what's preventing them from using it? And taking that curious lens as opposed to a prescriptive, policing type approach, and to say, hey, guys, built this tool. The use of it's not negotiable. We need to be using it. So help me understand what's preventing you from using it right now. And, how can I support you guys in using it more frequently and consistently? What might that look like? And he was like, huh. I'm like, yeah, approach it with curiosity and get to the bottom of these assumptions by checking those assumptions and asking, is this what's happening? Like what, I'm a little curious, and go at it from that curious lens as opposed to that, disciplinary lens. And it's just really interesting kind of parallel that sometimes we run with these assumptions, and those assumptions will prevent us, or that fear will prevent us from having that conversation and communicating certain information. But if you check those assumptions and you approach it with curiosity, that can be game changing.
Curiosity also implies a little bit of humility, which is something that we need. We have to recognize that everything changes all the time. We go to great lengths, I think, as a society to maintain a veneer of stability. And there are certain things that have proved fairly stable over the millennia, but there's also things that we cannot control that are going to change. And what's happened in the workforce as a global, entity is that people have been faced with mortality and have decided that they don't need to take this crap if they don't. And also younger people, and we haven't talked about demographics, yet, but younger people entering the workforce for the first time have a very different perspective about what they're willing to put up with and how hard they need to work.
Okay, I like where we're going here. I like where we're going. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about strategies for different communication preferences and strategies for the different generations in the workplace at this moment.
Yeah. Because what happened now, in some cases, there are people out there who literally entered the workforce during a pandemic. So they're going to have a very strange, a lack of centeredness about it. It's all kind of up in the air. But my point there is that there was a certain amount of loosened formality to education, to preparation for the workforce, for training. So everything that happened during that time, from little kids up until, us, is a little bit under substandard. So so everybody's preparation is a little bit hindered. Okay, then you have the fact that, you know, people are just prioritizing things differently. This could be a really good thing. They're like, okay, I am not going to sacrifice my weekends for my job. Like when I was starting out, that was the idea of saying I don't work on a weekend was like a, you know, especially in film production where I started and advertising, things like that. Where
that was a deal breaker.
Well, most
you weren't getting a job if you didn't do weekends.
Most film productions take place on weekends, so you know, and they certainly could, or they. So you didn't have that. If you wanted to be in the business, you had to put your head down. You had to work your butt off. Now, some people might say, "Well, so for what? What am I going through this for?" So management, which generally tends to be a bit older. Right. And if, you know, management has to reconcile who their audience is in terms of evaluating what they're willing to take and how they're willing to be treated.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. And that work-life balance has really been brought to the forefront, and the preference for that flexibility and having to be more adaptive has become paramount post-pandemic. I'm the eternal optimist. I'm going to go with post-pandemic, although I know that we're still.
I say post-pandemic.
There you go. Let's go.
I like to say post-pandemic.
It makes me hopeful.
Yeah. You know, at the very worst, in the worst case scenario, God forbid, we would simply be pre-pandemic.
Yeah, no, let's not.
Which I hope not.
Don't do that one. Back to I just want to pry a bit more from a communication standpoint. If, you know, employers are trying to figure out, I hear this all the time, I don't get the younger generation. I don't understand what their needs are. I don't know how to, you know, how to convey my message so that it actually lands and they actually use it or they actually uphold it. Like this is so confusing. Have you seen this? Some variances depending on the generations, and maybe some really quick tips on what the preferences per generation tends to be. For example, millennials, the younger generations who they were raised with instant feedback all the time. So they need ongoing, consistent feedback, because they would post a picture and they wait to see how many likes, right? So we've conditioned them to this instant, continuous feedback, while the older generations tend to prefer, you know, this more autonomous, independent type approach to management and leadership. So, you know, if you try to provide that same level of communication that you would with the younger generation, then that might be construed as micromanaging. So really, again, it comes back to your initial point of starting with your audience and tailoring your approach, your communication approach, based on a number of factors, including what their likely preferences are.
Yeah. And here's to that point, I would say you have to collect this information from your workforce. And this goes back to that idea that I threw out there of, let's say you were doing this email thing to your staff, and you said, we want to do a survey, and we're going to put together a survey, and we could do it ourselves, or there's companies that put together the surveys. But the fact is, we're going to couch it in such a way that it's fun, that it's engaging. Again, you can tell them they don't have to do it, you know, and probably if it's fun, they will, because it's better than working for 10 minutes. And so they go, okay, you know, you're asking their preferences about this or that. How do they want to be approached about this? How do they like to be approached about that? First, soliciting their opinion is already going to get you in better with them. And then you might learn more. And again, this idea of a willingness to learn, like we were talking about, humility, there's no substitute for it. So, you know, better than after the fact to say, oh, well, I'm sorry I sent that memo. I didn't know it would offend them. Well, you get to know them. And I think forms now, especially with the sophisticated way in which forms can be created and processed, that it's not a bad system to have in place for a larger group of people. Yeah. I mean, you work with some organizations, they have thousands of people. They need to somehow connect in a way that feels considered and personal, but isn't 1,000 meetings.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels authentic for sure.
Yeah.
So in your work with organizations, what are some of the most unique communication strategies or communication campaigns that you've seen internally?
Well, potato sack races are out. That's no longer, there's too many liabilities with insurance. A lot of people, depending on how rural they are, a lot of dung, a lot of issues with dung. And, of course, everybody has one leg in the sack and one leg out. That means that there's a, 50% chance that each person will get dung on their foot. There may even be 100% chance, depending on the farm that this takes place on. So those are the kinds of things that I'm usually pretty handy with as far as information. But strategies. I mean, are you talking about strategies for communication? Yeah. The main thing I do, what I like to do is I create a like a bubble that has the core value of a company, and it distill it down to its real core value. And rather than say we're taking our core value out to the customer, you say, okay, we're going to build a kind of a silo, a protective area around this core value. So the next layer is going to be our C-suite or our leadership team. And we're going to focus on this core and this leadership team and get this communication style down before we ever talk to the public. And then we're going to put the management on top of that. We're going to build another layer and communicate with management. So it's a little unorthodox too, I think, to do this, because the way that we used to be taught was, okay, you're working for the CEO. This is how you talk to the CEO. Mm-hmm. You're working for the CEO, and now as a result, I'll tell you. So that then they have, your management, you're allowed to talk to this person this way and this person that way, but they're losing all of the nuance of the company culture and the core ethos, because they're dividing the way that you talk to people into a hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And as a result, the CEO is extremely lonely because there's nobody at the CEO level except a board of directors, let's say, that can even talk to the CEO really. Whereas if you start to build out from this core value thing, and everybody is like playing a game of almost telephone where they're trying to embody and communicate on the same level, then you get to that team of employees, and then eventually you get to the public. And you don't even create your public-facing campaign until you've gone through all of these steps, and that's what I do in that biggest picture.
Okay, so you get them all on the same page. You get them embodying that same mindset, embodying this communication strategy, this communication, I guess, protocol, and this is how we communicate, and this is how we speak. And
it's a culture more than a protocol. Okay. Protocol sounds like, like very, very constricting. It evolves as we develop it. So the ad campaign that eventually is created, let's say for this company, will by in all likelihood have been influenced by the development that went on with the messaging, with the company messaging and the company tone throughout these various levels, so that the person who's in the mailroom, so to speak, has actually had an influence on the style and personality of the company. And now when it goes out to the public, everyone at the company feels like they actually had something to do with it beyond whatever their task was or their job. Mm-hmm, so when that happens, I feel like it's a real success.
It's a real win. I like that. Yeah. I like that you've got your employees, your team members that much more invested in the purpose and impact of the broader overarching kind of organizational purpose, right? And that broader overarching vision and mission that's a collective effort. And when if they know they've had a hand in that communication culture as it's now kind of spilling out externally into the brand campaign, then they'll be that much more invested in, you know, just providing that high level of quality service to that external facing customer. I love that.
Yeah, it's much more eloquent than I said it, but it's the same idea.
One of the things I'd like for you to touch on, and you know, we did when you and I first met back in October, we talked about, I explained how a lot of companies are now finding value in involving and getting a bit more creative with their internal communication strategies and making sure that they're you know, gamifying it to some extent, and they're adding those nice, you know, images and the more engaging visuals and these infographics to convey metrics. Because when you talk metrics and numbers, it's like, meh, but if you put them up on a visual, they're a lot more digestible, and you're able to process and get to the bottom of why I need to know this much quicker. And it provides really that way of communicating it to your team members as well, for them to see how they're measuring up relevant to whatever is being showcased. So what are some tips you could provide maybe about how to make these kinds of boring things much more engaging and much more interesting internally? Are there best practices maybe that you've identified that you've seen companies do? And what is a company supposed to strive for, I suppose, to be that you know, great communicator internally?
Well, honesty is the most deceptively simple answer. So it sounds easy. It's not. It sounds scary, maybe conversely, but it's not. You know, the thing, you know, a willingness to experiment, to me anyway, in this day and age is a plus.
Like,
you know, the old staid institutions of old, you know, like that whole thing. That's how it was done for 120 years, and we did it for this way. We got to get rid of that, because the fact is, let's say I had a crazy idea, and I admittedly, this is not a case study. I've never thought of this before, but let's just say we said, all right, you know, on Sesame Street, they were really good at communicating these very basic ideas, whether it's counting or whatever it is. So let's say we have a complex idea, but we do a Sesame Street version of trying to explain this new product to our team and do a thing. And we have the count and the characters, and, you know, so
tell me you're going to do the count voice for us.
Well, yeah, I could probably do the count, but I don't know what the stats that they would be using are. But well, give me a stat. Give me some kind of give me some kind of statistic that you.
Our turnover rate is now 21%.
Right. Okay. So it's like, how many employees did we have today? We had 1,000 employees. After yesterday's corporate fiasco, we now have 125 employees fewer. You know, it's like, but anyway, you have to really script these things. But that said, it's like, imagine a few scenarios. It's essentially the equivalent of a video puppet show that, you know, a Sesame Street explanation of a really complex topic.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say, well, that's never really been done. I don't know. They're going to, and what if it failed? Are people going to say, you know, you guys are a bunch of idiots? No. If your intent is to, because, and the reason this was playing around in my head is because we are sometimes walking a tightrope between underestimating and overestimating an audience, whether you're a comedian, whether you're a corporate entity, whether you're a boss, or, you know, or a novelist, a writer, right? Yep. And you're like, well, I don't want to talk down to my audience, but I also don't want to, you know, well, here you're going so remedial almost in your approach that it's comical, which means they're not saying I'm stupid. They're saying this is hard to teach.
I like it.
You know, and
like
you
it.
write it with humor, you write a thing. I think it could be a good idea. I think it could be a thing.
Yeah.
But if it failed, so you tried, and you tried because you cared.
Yes, I love it.
That's it.
And that's what you're going to end up conveying to
Yeah,
your
that
team.
you cared.
I love it. Yeah, that we care.
You care.
And listen, we get that it's complex. Let's try this Sesame Street approach to see if we can kind of, you know, make it digestible, give it to you guys in smaller, manageable bites. And if it falls flat, then you know what? At least we tried and we care. And I think that's really interesting. I like that. So don't be afraid to fail.
Don't be afraid to fail.
Stick with honesty, even if it's scary. If it is scary, then just get creative. And even if it's never been tried that way before, why not try it? Think outside the box, bring those big ideas, and don't be afraid to innovate when it comes to messaging. And I guess the format too, that you deliver that messaging in.
Yeah.
Be afraid to think outside the box.
And who knows, maybe that ends up being a campaign. Maybe that ends up being an outward facing campaign. You never know. And then everybody has that ownership that we talked about. So much is possible if you have some humility and a directness.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I remember when we first started talking, you were explaining what you did. This is back in October, what you did with this company, with Yes Brand, and how you worked with clients. And it's through those conversations that I thought, you know, I'm seeing a trend, right? Internally, the importance of involving and getting strategic with your communications internally and involving marketing to make it a lot more impactful and to help. I'm going to talk about something as easy as, we know that one of the employee needs is to understand how the work they do connects to the broader organizational purpose, right? And that broader, they want to know the work they do has an impact in people's lives, period. Mm-hmm. So where it's really important to keep them engaged and retain them is to help them connect the work they do to that broader purpose. So why not involve communications and your marketing folks in, maybe you showcase, you go a reverse journey of a customer and the product, take the product out of that client's hand, that customer's hands, and then work all the way backwards of all the different hands that had a part in delivering that product to that customer. And then share that video internally, if it's a video, if whatever you end up making with it, share it internally and showcase some of those success stories to help people connect to how the work they do. Although it might seem mundane, it actually has a huge impact on the lives of people outside of your company, right? Be it a service or product. So I remember us talking about that and kind of drawing those parallels that we need to get more folks like you involved internally to help us craft our internal brand and to help us safeguard and communicate that internal brand as well.
True. Well said. Well said. And it does take some bravery and it does take some fortitude, but ultimately, intent is just another word that I always circle around back to. Intent is so important. You know, if you are being disingenuous, then your team will know it. Your audience will know it. If you don't believe in your product, for example, if you don't believe in your product, you're never going to really convince anybody beyond a certain point. Mm-hmm. It's gonna fall through. So your time is better spent figuring out how to believe in it. Yeah. And if you spend some time figuring out how to believe in your workforce, then you're likely to develop a stronger bond with that workforce, even if you have to go through some tough conversations or rough growing pains.
Yeah. Well, Hersh, are there any parting tips or any nuggets of wisdom to offer relevant to how to improve communication internally?
No, I think you know everything now. I think I've armed you with everything that you could possibly need.
And where can listeners, cold drinks, yes.
Cold drinks are good, on a fishing trips.
There you go.
Here's the last tip. And this really does come from a very sincere place. I'm not kidding about this. Don't force what you think your workforce will enjoy on them. Wow. Don't say, okay, everybody's going bowling this Wednesday at 6 p.m. So everybody put your bowling shoes on. We're all going bowling. And now you haven't found out if anybody likes bowling, if anybody, the operations person likes bowling, and they asked them about it and they said, yeah, let's go bowling. And then it's like, everybody must go. We're going to do a bowling night where we have pizza and we're going to talk through all our fears and whatever it is. It's like your intention was good. So the intent was there, but don't force what you think will be helpful onto them. And don't get in your head. That goes, where this part is? This is the humility part. You got to find out from them. You got to find out from other people what people need, right? That's what people driven is. So don't force your creative solutions on people.
Yeah. Instead, ask them and,
find out,
ask them, have those conversations. Yeah. Map out what they would prefer and start from there. I love it. I love it. If people want to continue the conversation with you, Hersh, how can they connect with you? What are some of the ways they can?
Well, since I'm very much like a therapist, they can go to getmessagetherapy.com, and that will lead them to my kind of work page, and they can contact me on that website. That's probably the best place.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to include the link in the show notes. Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure,
sharing
Lori.
Your wisdom, and of course for giving us all tidbits of humor throughout, which is what I love you for.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I love being here.
Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guest, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.